Okay, today we're very excited to be talking with the man who is usually on the other side of the camera, Dr. Tom Scott, Professor Emeritus of History at Kennesaw State University. Dr. Scott has donated his time to do well over 50 oral history interviews for the Save Acworth History Foundation, but he knows as much about Cobb County and Acworth history as anyone. Dr. Scott, thank you for speaking with us today. I know you grew up in Tennessee. Tell us how you made your way to Cobb County.
Well, I did grow up in Knoxville, Tennessee. My parents were actually from West Tennessee originally, so I had southern roots, but they'd both gone north to find jobs out of high school, and my father to Chicago and my mother to South Bend, Indiana, and they got back together up north. And so I was actually born in Oak Park, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. Famous for Hemingway and Frank Lloyd Wright, and some famous people came out of there. None of my ancestors, but some famous people. But I have no memories of the North really. I was 1 year old when they moved back south, and my father worked for TVA. He was an engineer, and so I grew up in Knoxville. Went through school at the University of Tennessee, and somewhere along the line became a history major and taught 1 year over in North Carolina, and it wasn't a very good fit for me, and so I was applying around, and a job came available at this little junior college in Cobb County called Kennesaw Junior College. And so in 1968 I came here to teach at KJC.
Were you always interested in history, even as a child?
I think I was, but nobody ever thought about me majoring in history. I never thought about it. My undergraduate degree was in zoology, and I always was far better on those aptitude tests on the math part than I was on the verbal part, and so everybody thought I ought to have a career, go into medicine or something like that. And so I was pre-med and zoology as an undergraduate. And I think it took a while before I did what I wanted to do instead of what people thought I ought to do. But it was very clear early on that science was not for me. And if anybody was going to blow up a chemistry lab, I would be the one that would do it. And I've soon found that I was more interested in, say, the history of medicine than I was in medicine per se or history of anything. And I think part of it, I came from a family of great storytellers. I mean, my father he was funny. He had stories all the time that he was telling, and people thought I was a little weird, I guess, when I was growing up, because we'd have a church social, or TVA workers would get together, and the adults would be off talking, and the kids would be off and playing by themselves, and I was never playing with the kids. I mean, I always thought they were pretty boring. They didn't know anything. I was always on the edge of the adult group just to listen to what people had to say. And, I grew up with stories of, I had old parents, and they were children of old parents. So I had one grandfather that was born in 1851, and another one that was born in 1860, I guess it was. The grandmothers were born pretty close to that time as well. And so I would grow up hearing these stories that, particularly the one that was born in 1851, had vivid memories of the Civil War, and both the Union and Confederate Army traveling through their part of Middle Tennessee, where a number of the battles were taking place. And even the one that was born in 1860, one of his vivid memories is he must have only been about 4 years old, but he remembered they had a farm where the Duck and the Buffalo Rivers come together near the Tennessee, and they had a farm, and he remembered sitting on a bluff and watching the Union troops crossing the river, and I guess they marched through his cornfield, their cornfield there. And so it was scary times and lots of stories. One of my great-grandfathers, I guess they were all in the Confederate Army, and one of them was captured at the fall of Fort Donelson and was a prisoner of war at the Rock Island prisoner of war camp in Illinois for a while. And another one was in North Carolina when General Johnson surrendered his army and had to march all the way home from North Carolina to West Tennessee. And so at any rate, I grew up with all those stories, and particularly my father's stories were about things that I didn't experience growing up. He grew up on a farm. I grew up in Knoxville. And I just was always fascinated with stories that people that had experiences that were different than mine.
Yeah. Oh, I know you wrote a dissertation on Cobb County in the late 19th century. What did you learn from that?
Well, by the time that I had come to Kennesaw, I was really interested in local history of wherever I was, and where I was Cobb County. And so I wanted to do something on Cobb County, and my major professor at the University of Tennessee was, I guess, an authority on Andrew Johnson. He was editing the papers of President Andrew Johnson. And so he was, late 19th century was certainly one of his fields, but 20th century wasn't. And so at any rate, I was able to persuade him to let me work on Cobb County in the late 19th century and do it in the context of the Upper Piedmont and, that area that stretches through several states, the red clay and all that through several states. But something else that I was interested in, I'd mentioned earlier that I had a strong math background, and there was kind of an emphasis on quantitative studies in history at that time, and statistical studies and what have you. And one way to really study about people from the bottom up was to get all these massive government records that you get from Tax Digest and raw census data and what have you. And so I guess one of the things I learned from all of this is that quantification can only take you so far. But I had 60,000 IBM cards that my wife and I had punched with all this data from the census of, we knew how many pigs each farmer in Cobb County had, and how many acres of corn they planted, and who owned their farms and who didn't own their farms. And we just had a massive amount of statistical data. And I guess one of the things that we learned from all of this is that just how poor the South was in those years after the Civil War. By the time you got up to 1900, which was the end of my study, 56% of the farm, and most people were farmers in Cobb County, 56% of them did not own their land. They were renting from somebody else. Some of them were what were known as fixed renters, where they had a set amount that they would pay, like $50 a year or 5 bales of cotton. It would be a fixed rent that they would pay, and they were usually the ones that were the best off because they were actually, in business terms, they were taking a risk, that if they had a good crop, they made a lot of money. If they had a bad crop, they still had to pay their rent if it was a fixed amount. And so these were kind of the elite, but that was like 22% of all of the renters. And the rest of them were what were known as sharecroppers. And if they were black, they tended to be half-croppers, where they rented not only the land, but the landlord provided their mule and provided nobody used fertilizer back then very much, but the landlord would provide them with the things that they needed, and particularly their mule and the land. And The rents were really pretty steep. It would be half of everything that you grew. And then most of the white farmers were what were known as on a system called thirds and fourths, where they paid a third of the corn and a fourth of the cotton that they grew as rent. But there's also a lot of variety, and you know the bad thing about being a sharecropper is that you only got paid once a year, and these were poor people that got paid when the crop came in, and so what they'd have to do is that they'd go down to a store in Acworth or Marietta or what have you, just one of these general stores, and they'd open up a line of credit. And the only collateral that they had was the crop that they were planting. So they were on what was known as the crop lien system. And, they could get coffee or whatever they needed from the stores, and they would just run up a line of credit all year long. And, the landlords went along with this, and the merchants kept the books, and the tenants, the poor tenants oftentimes didn't know how far they were in debt until the crop was harvested. And there was actually a study that was done on Georgia in this period that I was studying that based on state agricultural department records, that if you think of this in terms of having a credit card, people on average were paying 59% per annum in interest on these loans that they were running up under the crop lien system. So it was a dead-end street for lots of people, and it was a period of a tremendous amount of poverty. People had plenty to eat, I guess, from what they grew on their farms, but they didn't have much else. And yet, I kept running into these people that were just phenomenal successes, and I always wanted to know more about how they did it. Like, we found a couple in North Cobb County that lived off Shallowford Road between Bell's Ferry and Canton Road, and his name was Isom, her name was Millie, the last name was Grissom, Gresham. Both whites and blacks pronounced Grissom at that time. And both of them came out of slavery. Fred Bentley Sr. told me years ago that I think they may have been part of the family, were slaves of one of Fred's ancestors, and he said that they gave them 40 acres of land when they came out of slavery. I haven't been able to document that, but I had no reason to doubt it. But by 1900, they had 600 acres of land that they had accumulated. And they were the wealthiest black family, rural family in Cobb County in those years. And benefactors of the community, they gave the land for Mount Zion AME Church in Kennesaw, right about where Wade Green and Cherokee Street and Wade Green and Shiloh Road come together. And yet my wife found that they retired in old age into Vine City in Atlanta. And so my wife went down to the Fulton County Courthouse and found, in the probate court, and found their wills, and they signed with an X, so they were illiterate. And just how did, in the age of segregation, a black couple accumulate all this land, and then when they went into Atlanta, they had a whole bunch of rental properties that they owned? How could they do it? I think some people may have an entrepreneurial gene that other people don't have, and they were so successful. So at any rate, I guess I learned a lot about Cobb County from doing that dissertation, but I guess I also learned that quantitative studies could only take you so far, and it really didn't answer these questions of what was life like for these people really, and how did people like the Grissoms become so successful, and the Rogerses in Marietta, the Broadnax family out in the Macklin Road, over at least the Powder Springs area of the county. How did they do it? And so I guess at that point I decided no more quantitative studies. let's stick a microphone in front of people and start asking them these questions. And go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, I know when you started at KJC, it was pretty small.
1,300.
How has it changed over the years?
How has Kennesaw changed? Kennesaw's changed massively, and of course I'm extremely proud of being at Kennesaw all those years and being part of it. But we were a little junior college, 1,300 students, but I think it was very clear from the beginning that they were hiring a faculty not for a junior college but for a 4-year school. And so that's the first thing they told me. I didn't have my doctorate when I started. I had a year beyond the master's. I just wanted to get out and teach for a while just to see whether I was capable of teaching. But they told me, we expect you to get your doctorate. And you're going to have to do it while you're teaching full-time here, but we expect you to finish. So that was communicated to us from the very beginning. And I think the other thing that was communicated to us from the beginning is that we were going to have high standards. There's a lot of prejudice against junior colleges that, anybody can pass in a junior college, and if you can't get into Georgia, you go to a junior college or what have you. And to some degree that was true, but by the same token, what they told us is, we don't care how many you flunk if they don't learn the material. We expect you to have standards that are at least as high as Georgia Tech or University of Georgia. And I remember Dr. Sturgis, our president, when we'd have faculty meetings, he would come in with his slides to show how our students did when they transferred to other places. And if their grade averages went down when they transferred to other places, that was bad. If it went up, it sounded like, or if they stayed the same, it sounded like we had prepared them well in the basic studies. And basically what his charts would always show is that when our students transferred to the University of Georgia, their average stayed about the same there. Of course, they may be getting into their major, and that may be part of why their average stayed the same. But if they went to Georgia Tech, their average went down a little bit. If they went to West Georgia, their average went up. And so that was the focus at the beginning. And from the beginning, we had some phenomenal local leaders in Cobb County in that period, I think. We still do today. But we had some back then that were working from the beginning to persuade the Board of Regents to convert us to a 4-year school. And so by 1976, the Board of Regents approved. They gave us 2 years to make the transition. So 78 was the year I finished my doctorate. Right as we became a 4-year school, I had my doctorate. And I mean, it was a wonderful time at Kennesaw because we had been hired to teach American history or world history or what have you, but nobody was hired for a specific discipline. When we were junior college, we didn't have those upper level courses. And all of a sudden we could have a faculty meeting and just decide, well, who wants to teach modern Middle East? Who wants to teach Georgia history? And I was lucky that nobody else wanted to teach Georgia history. So I got to teach Georgia history. And so at any rate, I guess the other thing that happened at that time, I had my doctorate. We were beginning to move beyond being strictly a teaching institution, and some of us at least wanted to do some research, but there wasn't any money for it, and there wasn't any support. I mean, you got a pat on the back, and that was about it. And so it was very helpful to do local studies because you didn't have to travel 500 miles to find an archive that had the records that you needed. And in my case, I was also interested in service. And I guess I did 2 things early on that were very affordable, and one was to get a tape recorder so I could go out and interview people, and the other was to get an old slide projector so I could put together a slideshow and go out and start talking about Cobb County to anybody that wanted to invite me out to speak. And so for a while there, I guess probably at least twice a month, I was talking to a school or if a teacher invited me to speak to a class, or I spoke to every DAR chapter in creation, I think, and Sons of the American Revolution, and church groups, whoever wanted somebody to talk about Cobb County. I went out and talked, and then at the same time started going out and interviewing people as well.
When did you start doing the oral histories?
78 officially. Actually, my wife and I did a couple back in 1973, and I had a few students that did interviews along the way as class projects. Even when they were just taking survey classes, I'd sometimes have a project that they could get some extra credit to go out and interview somebody. So I was doing all that, but I didn't really know what I was doing back then. And I guess I officially got started in 78, right after I finished my doctorate.
Do you remember the first person you interviewed?
I do. And I'll say this. One thing that I've learned over time is that sometimes the best interviewers are people who are very shy. And introverted people, they don't shine at a party, but they love one-on-one. They're people they're great husbands and great wives and so on because they love those small, intimate groups. But I was so shy when I started that project that I couldn't get on the phone and call anybody up and ask an interview and try to explain who I was and why I was doing. So at first, this only lasted for the first set of interviews, but I actually sent letters to people that I wanted to interview, and I put stamped self-addressed postcards inside that they could send back saying yes or no, it's okay to contact me. And I mean, it's crazy, but that's the way I was at the beginning. And the first person that I interviewed was Herbert McCollum, who was former commissioner of roads and revenues in Cobb County. And this was 1978, and he had gone out of office after 1964. He was in from 1956 to 64, and actually did a lot of things. McCollum Airport comes in that period, and what have you. But I think he also felt that he'd been rejected to some degree, that we went from the one-man commissioner to the five-person commission in 64, and that's when Ernest Barrett comes in. And of course, Ernest Barrett was phenomenal as a commission chair. And so I think Herbert McCollum somehow or other felt that he had a story to tell that hadn't been told properly, that people had forgotten the good things that he had done. And so he invited me out to his house, and I went out there and interviewed him, and he had all kinds of pictures that he gave me that we copied, that we've still got in the archive at Kennesaw. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that. And then the second interview I did at almost the same time was M.J. Woods, who was the longtime principal of the Lemon Street High School. And he was retired by the time that I interviewed him, but he had been principal at Lemon Street High from 1929 to 1960, and then he had been principal of the Wright Street School for a while, all in the days of segregation, and then retired in 66, right when integration was about to come in. But he had some good recollections too that talked about the black history of Cobb County and what the schools were like, and what they did at the Lemon Street High School and what have you. And so I interviewed him, and then I guess the next one after that was Schuler Antley, who was the former superintendent of schools in Cobb County. And so that's kind of how the project got underway.
Now, how many interviews do you think you've done over the years?
Every now and then I try to come up with some kind of a count. I don't really have a good count. I know it's well over 300 that we've done.
You've done over 50 for us.
Yeah, so if you start adding some of those things together, 300, 400, 500, somewhere in there.
Well, I know you did a lot of interviews in Acworth back at the start of the century. Can you talk about how that came about?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. I credit two people. First was a school teacher at North Cobb High School. I think she went under the name of Carla Carden at that time. I think she's Carla Miller today, after she got married. But she was teaching a class for accelerated students at North Cobb High School in local history. And there was a community person that was working with her named Abby Parks. And Abby Parks is phenomenal too, as you know. She hadn't really been in Cobb County that long at that time. I remember going through the house that she bought, the old McMillan house. Before they bought it, my wife and I looked at it and decided it was far too much for us to think about renovating. But she was working with Carla, and I don't know, it was probably Abby that called me up and asked me if we could do some interviews with her in her class. And I went out and talked to her class on Bell Aircraft or something or other as well. But and we'd always have, at the end of the school year, they would have a kind of a party for the class out at the beach. And we'd have gatherings out there, and I might tell them the history of how the beach came about, those kinds of things. But they asked me if we'd start doing interviews, and we did, and we did a bunch of them right inside the classroom so that the students could listen and see how oral histories were done, and they could ask their questions at the end of the interview as well. And you had mentioned the other day, we interviewed some people like Amos Dewar and Evelyn Gregg, who some prominent African Americans in the community. We interviewed Butch Price and a number of folks like that. And so that was neat. And we'd do the interviews, and then what I did from the beginning with my project was that we would always get them transcribed. And we didn't have YouTube back then. And we'd transcribe them, and I would edit them, and we'd let people take a look at their interview and make whatever changes that they wanted. But that's how that project started. And your in-laws, we didn't interview in the classroom, but I remember going to their home to interview Robert and Betty Kienel.
Yeah, I know a lot of the people you've interviewed for us now are second-generation interviewees. You've got Jimmy Durham and the Kienels and Moose McRae. Can you talk about
some of those? Sure, I'll be happy to. In fact, Jimmy Durham, I think, contacted Kennesaw. I'm not sure who he contacted now. It wasn't me directly, but said that we ought to interview his parents. And so we went out. There's a person that was working with the project at that time named Mary Colley, and I went out to the Durham farm place, homestead, and interviewed Harvey and Bessie Durham. I think that was 1987 that we interviewed them, and it was. Not only did I learn a lot in that interview, but I actually used parts of that interview later on in a book that I put together, a book of documents that I put together on Georgia history that I used to use in my Georgia history class, where he had some great stories too about, well, first of all, how farming worked in this area and tenant farming and all of that. But he was also a rural mail carrier for a number of years, and he worked for the Agricultural Adjustment Administration during the Great Depression. And his job was to go out and measure the farmers' cotton. The government would give people a quota of how many acres that they could plant. And I say the government, it was actually a local committee that would determine who got to grow what locally. So you'd have to apply to this local committee, and they would approve or not approve. But Harvey's job was to go out and to measure the crop to make sure that if somebody was only supposed to grow 4 acres, that they weren't cheating and growing more. And so he had some great stories about finding cotton patches back in the woods where people were trying to cheat the government, I guess, by growing cotton. And I guess one of my favorite stories is that showed, I guess, both the positive and what people didn't like about New Deal programs. There was a farmer in somewhere in the Mars Hill community that Harvey knew, at least if he saw him, he knew him. Didn't know that well, but this farmer, some kid that was working for the Agricultural Adjustment Administration named Kemp was, and Kemp's a famous name in Cobb County, but he was sent out to measure the farmer's crop, and I guess he was kind of arrogant. At least he went out and kind of told the farmer, "I'm measuring your crop," and this farmer said, "No, you're not." And he came out with a shotgun and ran the kid off. And so at any rate, the boss told Harvey that if he would go out and measure the crop, he'd pay him for a full day just to go do that one farm. And so he went on out there, and he said what he did is that he saw the farmer going out with his mules to the field, and he said he just stopped him and started complimenting his mules. And they spent about an hour. They just stopped and talked and what have you. And at the end of the hour, he said, "Well, I heard that you and Kemp had a little altercation the other day." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Did he run?" He said, "Yeah, he got it on." And he said, "Well, I've got the papers out in my car. What are you going to do if I measure them?" And he said, "Well, let's do it." And so, I think the moral of the story was that the farmer just wanted to be treated with a little respect. And that's what Mr. Durham did by chatting with him for an hour. And so, I thought it was just a fabulous story of again, what, these programs were vital to the survival of farmers in this area. But by the same token, they didn't like some bureaucrat somewhere telling them what to do. And so that was the Durhams. And I thought they were like a lot of people that I interview are just very impressive people for the fact that they had all this. I was looking at all this land that they had, and this is where Fry Elementary and Durham Middle School are located today on their home place. And I was just looking at all this land and said, this is worth a fortune. But they didn't care. What they wanted, their riches was the lifestyle that they've enjoyed all their life. And they didn't want to move into a fancy condo in Acworth. They wanted to stay out there on that farm. And I just ran into a number of farmers over the years that just couldn't be persuaded by some developer that wanted to give them big bucks for their land. They wanted to preserve, a lifestyle that we could all learn something from today.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about Lake Acworth and how it was created and changed life in Acworth? Some of the stories that I've got are from oral history, and I'm not sure how much to believe of all of them. And some of them are from newspaper accounts that probably are more reliable on what was going on. But basically the story on Lake Acworth was that the federal government had been planning to build a dam on the Etowah River for some time, and then the Depression, World War II, it got delayed. And right after World War II, they were determined to build that dam. And they did, and that was great, I guess, unless it was your farmland that got flooded. We've gotten a lot of recreational value and the use of the water and so on from that, and also flood control downstream at Rome and what have you. And that's part of what the dam was built in part to generate electricity. It was built in part for flood control. My father worked for the TVA dam, so
have a soft spot for engineers and people that build dams in my heart. But the problem in Acworth was that when you let the water through the dam to, in the spring of the year or whatever, the area around Acworth was going to turn into some mud flats. And so the big concern in Acworth was what's going to happen to us at that time, and couldn't we have a second dam, a sub-dam, to keep the water level high year-round in our community. We didn't want mosquitoes and all those things. And so there was actually a group that went down to a public hearing that the Corps of Engineers held in Atlanta in 1946. Fred Kienel was chair of the Planning Commission at that time, and he was down there, and Vera Hill Autry was represented, I guess, some of the women's groups that met down there. And they put in their case for a sub-dam and took a lot of politics in Washington and what have you, but that sub-dam was built, and that's what created the lake. And then I guess the other part of the story that I've got from an oral history with Harold Willingham, who was a very prominent, powerful member of the legislature from Cobb County for a number of years, and somehow or other he got on all the, well, he was a wheeler dealer who knew how to get things done, let's put it that way. He was also the attorney for practically every city in Cobb County and for the school board and what have you as well. And at any rate, his story was that Herman Talmadge was running for re-election in 1950. He came up to Acworth for some kind of a gathering and met with local people up here, and also Willingham and John Heck, who was the commissioner at that time. And, as Talmadge was prone to do, as politicians are prone to do, he said, well, boys, what do I need to do to get your vote? And I want to carry Acworth in this election. What do I need for your support? And they said, well, we've got this lake, we need a beach. The sand at Acworth Beach wasn't there naturally, and the beach house, wasn't there. And so they wanted some money, and Talmadge said, well, I promise you $25,000 if I get reelected. And so at any rate, Willingham's story is that he was in the legislature and he upped the amount to $100,000, and he and Heck went to meet with Talmadge, and Heck was saying he's not going to let you get away with that. But when they had the meeting, Talmadge comes in and he says, well, boys, have you put it in the budget? And they said, yes, sir, the money's there. And he said, well, let's go for it. And that's how that money came about. So at any rate, that's the beginning of the beach.
Now, how has Acworth changed in the years you've been doing histories here?
Acworth's a lot bigger place. It's grown a lot. It's still a small town. What's it now, 24,000?
I'm not even sure, but it still has that small town feel.
But I think when I came to Cobb County, it wasn't much over 1,000 people in Acworth. It was, the Acworth proper was a small place, so it has grown over the years. And I think Acworth is just a phenomenal story that probably lots of people ought to be studying to see how you use historic preservation to promote your local economy, and how you use taxpayers' money in a proper manner to promote your economy. And to me, Acworth is, it's like if you're interested in preserving things, it's not like you have to fight City Hall in Acworth compared to some places that I think Marcia Andruzzi was pro-historic preservation when she was mayor. Certainly Tommy Allagood has been during his time in office. And just the story of Save Acworth History Foundation, it's neat. not every community has a Save Acworth History Foundation. And it's just, I think it's a good indication of how people who are just community spirited and want to create a better place and are not in it for money, and but have volunteer time that they're willing to contribute, can do something worthwhile. And I know it started out to save the depot and turned into Save History instead. But this oral history project has just been very rewarding from my part to be part of it, to record all these stories. And so I just think of Acworth as a place where people get along and get things done. And I think a good case too, where you have to be careful not to label people conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican. I think what we've seen time and time again in Cobb County, people are willing to pay taxes if they know what the money's going for before they vote for the taxes, and they trust the people that are running the show. And so the fact that we've got the History Center in Acworth now, and Main Street's beautiful, I think.
It is. So why do you think it's important for us to do these oral histories?
If I can give kind of a convoluted answer to that question, I was trained in formal history, where you go to archives and you dig through a lot of records and you write about big themes. And I think the time that I was coming along in the 60s and 70s was one of those periods where if you focused on the national level, you could get really depressed. The Vietnam War was a colossal mistake in lots of ways that divided the country in ways that didn't need to be divided, and a war that was being fought for reasons that weren't all that clear to lots of people, and civil rights movements going on in the country at that time, a lot of social turmoil, college students protesting and occupying administration buildings and that sort of thing. And then the Watergate crisis did a whole lot to destroy. Back when I was coming along, people had a positive attitude toward the federal government. They believed that the federal government did good things for them, and it did. I'm a beneficiary of Medicare nowadays and Social Security. I believe in those things, and I'm grateful for the politicians that implemented them. But by the same token, it was easy to get really, really depressed and lose faith in humanity and what have you. But on the other hand, when you looked at the local level, I was seeing something very different. And we talked about some of these things earlier on, but I've really been amazed at how many people on the local level who become members of a board of aldermen or mayors or what have you are people who are not in it for personal gain. It's not a stepping stone to a higher office. They're not trying to make a ton of money. And if they're honest, they don't get paid much for any of these positions. And I tell you what, if I had to sit through city council meetings until 2 in the morning, I'd shoot myself. Whenever I go to these meetings, I'm very grateful that they take up whatever my item is early on, and I can get up and leave and not have to stay there. And beyond that, so many people on the local level that volunteer so much of their time to youth sports or what have you, and are community builders without a portfolio necessarily, but are doing things that benefit the community. And so if you focus on the local level and you have your eyes wide open and you see all these things that are going on, to me it's this tremendously uplifting. And you know, I enjoy talking to people that have stories to tell, that people that are different from me, that have things to tell. And I think for the most part, when I've done interviews, people don't know whether I'm conservative or liberal or what have you, because I feel that my job as an interviewer is to help them tell their story the way they want to tell it. And I just think it's fun to hear people be passionate about whatever they're passionate about. And so at any rate, I'm not sure that I answered the question that we started with, but in terms of these interviews, the record's going to be there forever. And, you know, there is a time that's going to come where people have different cultural values than we have today. And the best way to understand a culture is to hear people tell their stories, I think.
I agree.
And so I just think it's phenomenal that we've got a Save Acworth History Foundation that wants to record all this, and Jake in the back that's been filming all these things for us. And hopefully people will find use for it, and they do find use. I mean, the oral histories get a tremendous amount of use. I know from what the archivists tell me.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to talk about today?
Not unless there's anything else you want to ask.
Well, Dr. Scott, on behalf of everyone at Save Acworth History, I'd like to thank you for all the help you've given us, and I hope we can continue this partnership for a long time.
I hope so too. Thank you.